Hello there, gamerinos and gamerinas! Are you up for some 90s DOS adventure goodness? A bit of spookiness? Some Euro jank? Then this little obscure German game might be right up your alley. It was developed by Attic, who were responsible for some of the Dark Eye video game adaptations, and it was published, like most of Attic's games, by Starbite, who kinda were all over the place with their releases. This here is a game from my childhood. It was one of the first games I owned on my first PC, a chunky 166 MHz machine with 16 MB of RAM and a whopping 1 GB of hard drive space. I got this game together with the big box version of Zack McCracken and Pizza Connection, or Pizza Tycoon for all you beautiful people outside of Germany. I believe this game was on a small game compilation CD-ROM, though except for Mad TV I don't really remember any of the other games. I believe there was a weird creature puzzle game or simulation, I'm not really sure. Holy shit, no, I just found this one! All the games, well, except for Pizza Connection, were on one compilation, even Zack McCracken. And it came in a big box. It's that exact same one. Wow, that's a blast from the past. I'm not gonna buy it though. $130 is quite steep, even if I'm wallowing in nostalgia right now. Oh man, it doesn't stop! While editing this, another game from this old collection got re-released on GOG. It's like they know that I'm making this video right now. Even though I didn't understand most of the games, and by that I pretty much mean all the games I just mentioned. You see, I wasn't the brightest kid. While I did enjoy Zack McCracken, I didn't get very far, at least not on my own. In Mad TV, I just bought all the shows and movies that sounded funny and aired them without much regard for audience demographics. I cheated my way through Pizza Connection and well, I kinda got a whole lot done in Lords of Doom. This was by far the game I played the most, just because I seemed to achieve something in it. That said, even here I didn't get very far. Half of the map stayed inaccessible to me, and of the 4 playable characters I only ever got to see the 2 you start with. Still, this game kept me intrigued and motivated, and I look back fondly at my clumsy attempts to solve its many puzzles. So yeah, I guess the nostalgia goggles for this game are bolted to my face. It just holds a special place in my cold, dead gamer heart. But hey, me being a bit biased in favor of this game shouldn't be too bad. Not many people remember this game and you can't even get it nowadays. It's abandonware that's not even guaranteed to work on modern systems. I couldn't start it normally from a disc at least. And saving is also not a thing you're able to do because this game insists on you using a specially formatted floppy disk, and good luck finding a modern PC that even has a floppy drive. So yeah, if you're actually interested in playing this game and downloaded all the files or bought a used copy of it and then ran it through DOSBox or whatever other emulator works, you have to beat it in one clean run. Which is easier said than done, because the game can be quite stingy with telling you what it expects you to do and loves to kill you if you do it wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start Lords of Doom. The game begins with your 2 main characters in the center of a small town that has been overrun by monsters and is now in the iron grip of the 4 Lords of Doom. The Lord of Vampires, the Lord of Mummies, the Lord of Werewolves and the Lord of Zombies, whose minions are running amok in the town and have already killed most of the town's population. You don't get this information from the game though. As was often the case, you had to refer to the manual to learn this game's story, though for RPGs and adventure games this was a bit unusual. In these games, you'd get at least a little bit of backstory at the start of the game. This game here just starts and throws you into the action without explaining anything. And the manual doesn't even get into too much detail. This reads more like an advertisement blurb than a story. At least, that's the case for the DOS version. The Commodore 64 version goes into much more detail with a title crawl before the game begins. In the manual, we also got told to find the 2 other characters, one of which is a vampire killer, which is the only hint we get for a pretty abstruse and unnecessary mechanic or puzzle or whatever. But before we arrive at that point, let's just take a look at the town, or more accurately, the different environments or screens. It looks fine. The game used its range of colors pretty well. The environments are clear and well detailed. Each screen is a different drawing, and the scenes are drawn in a way so that you can see far into the distance. For example, you can see everything down the main street or everything within a corridor. Many games of the time had the perspective wander into an empty or dark space. Its graphics might not have been as detailed as some of this game's contemporaries, but it was in a good middle ground between the real lookers and the more primitive games. A major drawback, however, is the tiny play area. A huge chunk of the screen is reserved for overly large icons and the inventory. The map screen itself takes up only about a quarter of the screen. I don't know if this was due to technical limitations or to make it easier on the artists. You see, a lot of games relied on little tricks like using the background color and partly transparent sprites to save time and memory space when it came to rendering images. And these environments look like there wasn't that much trickery involved. On the other hand, Super Mario World released the same year, so yeah, I don't really understand the reasoning for this, but the screens themselves still look very nice. Though, this is the MS-DOS version, with the Amiga and Atari ST version looking pretty much the same. The Commodore 64 version looked quite different. I'd say the graphics of the DOS version are a lot better than the C64 version, but the C64 had the stronger art design in a lot of places. Not always, but pretty often. As for the sound, the Amiga version uses some realistic-ish sounds for combat and the like. And the C64 version uses a bit of music that actually sounds pretty good. The DOS version though only has beeps and boops, and some releases didn't even include these sounds, which led to an error message constantly flashing on screen. When it works though, the game sounds like this. Marvelous. So yeah, let's get exploring. We take control of Discount Julia Roberts and Eddie Murphy, well they're called Sharon and Charlie, who are both equipped with a kitchen knife to fend off the creatures of the night. And for the most part, these knives do a banger of a job. These are your basic weapons, with which you need to hit a monster about 100 times to kill it. As far as I'm aware, there is no unarmed combat in this game, so make sure not to drop them, at least until you find a better weapon. And there are some weapons that deal more damage to certain enemies. Vampires can be killed with a single shot from the crossbow. Holy shit! Okay, this is the anti-vampire weapon. And zombies die to a single shot from the revolver. The axe supposedly inflicts more damage on mummies, though I didn't really notice much of a difference. During combat, enemies constantly inflict damage upon every hero on the same screen. And as soon as an enemy appears, the hero isn't able to move away from that screen. So you have to defeat the monster to continue exploring, but it is possible to save a party member by moving another character to the same screen and kill whatever monster is attacking them. Luckily, you can only trigger a random encounter by actively moving from screen to screen. Inactive or idle heroes won't get attacked by wandering monsters. Sometimes you trigger a fight by opening a door or performing certain actions, but these work exactly like the random encounters. Well, mostly. There are some items that scare away random enemies but don't have an effect on monsters you actively trigger. You have to keep track of more than just your hit points though, because this is a bit of a survival game, so add that to the list of genre this game seems to belong to. With its traversal mechanic and party management, it appears to be a dungeon crawling RPG. The way you have to use and combine items though makes it more akin to adventure games, kinda like the MechVenture games. And with its emphasis on combat and its strict inventory management, it's a bit like a survival horror game that predated Alone in the Dark and is more open-ended than Resident Evil. And with the addition of a hunger and thirst meter, this game even takes elements from pure survival games, where you have to constantly shove food and drinks in your face or you'll die within a few minutes. Well, it's not too bad. There is more than enough food and drink lying around the city to get you through the game, if you know what you're doing. If you're wandering around aimlessly, just trying different solutions to the puzzles and failing, and you will do that a lot, and these mortal needs will put a strict time limit on your playthrough. But if you know how to circumvent it, then you don't have too many problems with all the other puzzles. For example, there's a butcher shop at the end of the road you're starting at, where you can find meat and sausages to satiate your hunger. And if you try to pick up some of the food in here without any room left in your inventory, then the food item gets dropped to the ground, but the interactable object is still there, so you can kinda create infinite food. I don't know whether that's supposed to happen or if it's a glitch, because I read that the butcher shop produces food over time, but on the other hand, if you have room in your inventory, then the object just disappears, so you tell me what's supposed to happen here. Many of the items we'll use throughout our playthrough we can find on this very street, so let's explore all the other stores as well. I already talked about the butcher shop, so let's look at the store across the street. This appears to be some kind of carpenter's shop. There are some crates and tool racks in here, you can find a hammer and a woodcutter's axe. As far as I know, the hammer is just an alternate weapon, but the axe can be used outside of combat, for example, to cut up the wooden logs within this very room, to make wooden stakes. That for some reason show no effect on vampires, as we will soon find out when we open the coffin standing against the wall. And let's take this opportunity to talk about how badly this game conveys its combat mechanics. To fight, you have to select a weapon and rapidly click on the baddie. A German hint book I read at the time stated that you have to click on the moving parts of the sprite, but I'm not really sure about that. Certain weapons inflict more or less damage, but I can't tell aside from the instant kill weapons. The reason is that the enemies in this game don't give feedback. They just repeat their animation until either you or them are dead. They don't have a damage animation, they don't flash red or white, they don't grunt or scream, nothing. So you don't know how much damage you inflict on them and you don't know how much health they have to begin with. But it's at least too much to just take it slow and count how often you have to click on them. It really discourages experimentation for me. Outside of the weapons you can read up on, I only ever used a knife because it reliably kills monsters without taking too long. Also, is it just me or do the monsters look a bit cheap? They all move and attack in just so slightly different ways, with only a handful frames of animation. Just like a digitized actor was filmed for about a minute and then traced over like 4 different times or so. The monsters in the C64 version all look different from one another and are all hand-drawn. It seems there was a lot more effort put into that version. Moving down the road, next to a parked car, we find a general store to the right, where we can pick up an empty gas canister and a pocket knife. And to the left we find a forge that holds a smelter we need to use later to craft our own ammunition, as well as a metal spool and a crowbar that we immediately try out on the car outside. To use an item, you have to select it from your inventory and then click on the weird icon showing the hand holding a question mark to kind of activate it in your hand. Your cursor transforms into a crosshair and by clicking on things, you now try to use the item on whatever it is you're clicking on. Fighting enemies works exactly the same. So we use the crowbar to force open the hood and take out the car battery. And while we're at it, we can use the pocket knife to carve a small wooden stick out of the stake. We don't need it right now, so why don't just drop it? Which is a pretty neat feature that wasn't unheard of in adventure games, but survival horror games had a complicated relationship with it. Alone in the Dark worked pretty much the same, but Resident Evil didn't give you the option to drop items. Only destroy them or store them at very specific points. Only in Resident Evil 0, when classic Resident Evil was already on the way out, did this feature pop up in the franchise. But here you can drop up to 10 items on any screen, to pick them up later, when you need them. For now, we're gonna leave the gas canister here, because right now we can't use it anyway and have to fill it on the car later with the right tool. Before we move on, let's combine the car battery with the wire we found just moments ago to create something, and leave it beside the gas canister. The next stop is a telegraph station. We can't do anything in here right now, but wait, what was that? There was clearly some shadowy figure moving in the background. Yeah, things like this happen quite often in the game. A pair of eyes staring at you for a brief moment from the darkness, a shadow moving in the background, a hand reaching for you through boarded up windows, blood dripping from the ceiling. You might even catch a glimpse of someone moving through a door and closing it behind them. a door you're about to walk through in a minute or so. All this is just flavor, atmosphere. There aren't any people or creatures moving around the game world dynamically. In fact, there aren't any other humans, well, living ones, beside the player characters. And all the monsters you encounter are triggered randomly when moving from screen to screen or by activating traps and things like that. So all these little moments are just the game's version of jump scares or moments to create a spooky atmosphere. And it gives the game a lot of charm. I appreciate it for what it is, even though it isn't actually scary. But back in 1990, when we weren't used to all the gore and special effects we have these days, when a lot more played out in our imagination instead of on the screen, it worked really well to make the whole experience a lot more creepy. At least it worked on me back then. We are now at a fork in the road. Moving further north will lead us to the mansion, which contains a good chunk of the game world, as well as some other locations of the town. So let's head down the street to the east first. There we find a theater, where we can get some popcorn and soda. And the movie running in the background? That's Alf! A popular sitcom about an alien crash landing on Earth and living with a human family from the late 80s. I guess the developers were fans of this hairy little dude. The C64 version instead shows the more fitting Nosferatu movie. Or not! I was so sure they showed the pixelated face of Max Schreck, who just has the most appropriate name since Schreck means shock or scare in German. But that aside, I was just completely wrong. They have a screening of Batman, who doesn't fit the setting that much better. Not that any of this has any impact on the game or the puzzles, it's just a bit weird. Next to the theater is a restaurant, which contains even more nourishment. Across the street there is a library where you can read a few books. Some of them are only here for a bit of humor, but the other tell you about the weaknesses of certain monsters. It can be a bit hard to distinguish between useful and useless texts in the game, but a good rule of thumb is, if it ends with a joke, you can disregard it. If it's played straight, it's useful information. But yeah, especially with later, mandatory books, the hints could be a bit more obvious. The last shop we find on the street seems to be a gardening supply store. There we find a shovel, a gardening pump and a rubber hose. With some trial and error, and I did that a lot back then, we find out that we can combine the pump and the hose with the gas canister to create a freaking flamethrower. This game doesn't hold back when it comes to ridiculousness. Sadly, using the thing isn't a fiery spectacle. The game is very light on special effects and such. Aside from the spooky creatures that are just here to create some atmosphere and the spooky creatures that attack you, nothing really moves in this game. Most of what's happening is told to the player via text box. Easily missable text boxes. You don't see the coffin opening and the vampire stepping out of it. A text box describes what's happening and then the vampire is just here. So it's even more surprising when some containers have a slightly different sprite after you took out the item inside of it. It's not anything special, it's just nice. There's not much left in this part of town. You can follow the road a bit further to the east to reach the edge of the forest. But we don't want to enter it right now. If we do, we first have to fight a near endless onslaught of werewolves and then get stuck in an unwinnable fight against the werewolf lord. Now, the game does attempt to warn you of your impending doom, but if you don't know where everything is and how everything works, these warnings are a bit inconsistent. Oh, this looks pretty unsafe. Yeah, I don't want to go there. So you move around the game world by clicking on these arrows on the edge of the exploration screen, or alternatively use the arrow keys on your keyboard. Directions in which your character is physically able to move in are highlighted in white, while dead ends are yellow. But then there are times when your character could move in a certain direction, but shouldn't, because there's nothing but death waiting for them. Pretty much all the edges of town work in that way. If you try to leave town, the forces of doom descend upon you and instantly kill you. The first time you try to leave town, the game displays a text box with a warning before it finally lets you run to your, well, doom. And these warnings only get refreshed when you leave the current screen. So it's possible that you already triggered the text box but couldn't finish reading the text and wanted another chance, because that might be the first time you encountered this and you're instantly killed. Or you quickly moved from screen to screen and hit the arrow key once too often because you forgot how far the town stretched out into this particular direction. Or maybe you clicked around, searching the screen from top to bottom cause you're stuck right now and happen to click on the arrow again and are greeted with a notice of your recent death. To be fair, you have to blunder around quite a bit to have this happen, and to be honest, I have no problem with this kind of death trap in and of itself. I just think the game should just refresh your attempts every time you click on something else. Well, and it doesn't really help that there are times where you have to ignore the game's warnings and proceed further to find the Lords of Doom. So do the thing you were taught, painfully so, not to do. And each of the 4 times it's unintuitive to a differing amount. The Lord of Werewolves is the easiest to find early on, but also nearly the most unintuitive to actually get to, because he's at the edge of town, near 2 other exits that, as we learned, instantly kill you. It might not be too bad, because if you just stumble around town and try every way because there's no other way forward, then you will find your way to him sooner or later. That's exactly what happened to me when I played this game as a kid. The award for most unintuitive monster lord goes to the zombie lord. For him, you have to ignore the game's warning and proceed further and actually die. You can find a cryptic hint to that, but it's really unintuitive. Because now you learned that all that awaits you is sudden death. But you have to move another character to the same spot, which is now safe because the other characters sacrificed themselves to clear the way. I can't imagine how anyone would have just known that they had to do that. The hint to this is really bad, with a book just mentioning that you have to make a sacrifice to defeat the forces of darkness, which really doesn't tell you anything. The warning the game gives you also doesn't give you anything more to go on. At least this one could have just said something like, "Oh no, there's a bunch of monsters over there. I could draw them away, but this would certainly be the end for me." At least then the player would know that this might be the solution to one of the puzzles. The other 2 lords aren't too bad. They have warnings like all the other death traps, but here you already know what you're getting into. The vampire is in the deepest bowels of a basement after a long hallway, so when the warning appears, you know that you have to prepare for a boss fight. And the mummy is in a secret hideout that you have to uncover first, so you expect him as well. To be fair, there is no situation in the game where you just instantly die without warning, not like it happens a lot in the MacVenture games. Back on the other road, there are 2 more buildings to enter. One is a bank, where we can't accomplish anything right now, and the other is a barbershop, where we can find an empty bottle, some scissors, a newspaper and a misleading draining pipe. The newspaper is just unimportant flavor text. Believe me, none of them add anything to the game. It's on the same level as your character's observations when clicking on otherwise non-interactable objects. You know those witty quips from games like Maniac Mansions? Yeah, none of the jokes in this game are as witty or funny. But why is the pipe misleading? You see, you can use it to drain some gas from the car's tank to refill your flamethrower. How do you do this with a metal pipe? I don't know. You think you had to use like a hose pipe, something more flexible, something you can bend, like in the C64 version. I guess whoever did the artwork just saw that you had to pick up something coming out of a sink, so they thought, draining pipe, that's it. Yeah, the DOS and all the other similar versions botched some of the graphics and even item name and descriptions, which obfuscates some puzzle solutions even more. There's definitely... I don't know how this could happen, but it did. So I'm not going to continue talking about each screen individually, but I wanted to take the time and talk about the first area of the game in greater detail, because I think it does a pretty good job in introducing all the major mechanics. First-time players will for sure encounter at least one enemy during this part. They come across puzzle items as well as food and drink, find interactable background objects, can use and combine items, and overall get a feel for movement and exploration. And even if you get stuck and can't find a way to open up the rest of the game, like I did as a kid, you can accomplish quite a lot in this first area. The game is pretty open-ended and a lot of important stuff is right here at the beginning. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight this area. There's a bit more to do in town. You can find a small chapel where you can fill your empty bottle with some holy water and even find a very useful crucifix that causes vampires to instantly flee from battle, like not even starting to attack. There's also a weapon shop where you can find a gun as well as some nitroglycerine. The last openly accessible part of town is the cemetery, but there's nothing to do here right now, quite literally. Even if you know what you have to do, you just couldn't because you need to find a certain clue first. Aside from some of the aforementioned confusing graphics or item descriptions, here might be my biggest gripe with the puzzle design. Even with the Four Lords, whose obscure ways to fight can be quite baffling, nothing stops you from walking straight into their lair and dying horribly. As long as you know where they are and what items you need. But there are a handful of puzzles in this game where you need to discover the written information during the playthrough to even be allowed to attempt the puzzle. You have to find a book about a dead knight to be able to dig up an obvious grave in the cemetery. And for something worse, you have to find all the numbers to a safe combination to have the combination be actually correct. If you just read up on it or remember it from a previous playthrough, then it just won't work until you find all the numbers during the current playthrough. This is just absurd. If they wanted to prevent the player from cheating their way through the game, they should have just randomized the save combination at the start of the playthrough. As for the grave, I don't know what's up with this. I don't need to read a book on flamethrowers to be able to build one from garbage. I don't need to find the information about vampires' weakness to crossbow bolts before I'm able to chop some wood and carve some bolts out of it. I can just do it. The hint for the grave is nice to have, but it just shouldn't be mandatory. Moving on. Nearly half of the game's playing area lies inside an old mansion that I, as a kid, wasn't able to enter. You need to enter it, though, to recruit the other two playable characters and find the necessary items to defeat at least 3 of the Four Lords. But the door is locked, and you have to solve an intricate puzzle to open it that I just wasn't able to comprehend when I was young. So you see, you have to click on the bushes beside the door, pick up the key, and yeah, I wasn't the brightest of kids. The mansion itself is a labyrinth of locked doors and blocked paths, dangerous traps and hidden items. Whereas in the town, most of the items were just out in the open, inside the mansion, there's a system to it all. It's artificial, as if someone designed the place to keep its secret safe, which is the case, of course. It's like the town is the open world of this game and the mansion is its dungeon. There isn't any real distinction between the two places. There's no difference gameplay-wise, and both areas take up more or less an equal part of the game world. My comparison might make it sound grander than it is. It's really just in the little details, but it still is a bit of a contrast, and I really like how naturally the exploration inside the mansion feels just this little bit different than in the town. On your first visit to the manor, you don't have to venture too far inside. Right away at the entrance, you find a notebook with the address of Abraham Van Halen, who, according to the game's manual, is a vampire hunter. So of course we want to seek his assistance in our fight against the creatures of the night. After learning this information, we can head back into town to the telegraph station and contact Van Halen. And a few minutes later, Discount Leslie Nielsen and whoever that's supposed to be arrive at our side. The old man even brought some med packs for everyone, so that's helpful. There's a tiny bit of strategy involved when it comes to keeping all the characters alive, since Van Halen requires the most food, while the two women of the group require slightly less. You're not gonna really notice it though, the game just isn't long enough for that, and besides that, you'll run out of drink before you run out of food, since those bars deplete much faster, in theory. So there's food and drink all over town and inside the mansion, but all of it comes in a limited quantity. Maybe the infinitely regrowing sausages aren't a glitch, but are meant to be seen as like taking stuff from the butcher shop's warehouse or storage, which would make sense because in the C64 version there's something similar with an apple tree near the gardening supply store that for some reason didn't make its way to the DOS version. As for drink, you can actually just use the sink in the mansion's kitchen to infinitely fill up bottles with drinking water. And with that, the survival mechanics of this game become obsolete. I'm not sure how I feel about this. On the one hand, this rewards ingenuity. I mean, You managed to find a useful contraption, maybe had to solve a puzzle or two to make it available, and actually discovered how it can be infinitely used. I think at that point, you deserve to have an easier time with the game's survival mechanics. Now, if the game were longer, I would think otherwise. Maybe if it's just a reward during the last stretch of the game, not something you can discover during the first 5 minutes. So overall I'm fine with it, because you'll most likely discover it only after having explored the game world for quite a while, tackled many of the game's puzzles, and maybe even had to restart the adventure a few times, so you had to engage with the system and experience the tension it can create. To find your way through the mansion, you have to collect different keys, hidden inside cabinets and drawers, and even deal with 1 or 2 different obstacles. There's a door at the back of the house that can be forced open with the crowbar, and some rubble in the basement that can be cleared with the shovel. Now, both these obstacles don't make it clear what you have to do. There are no instances in the first area of the game where you needed to interact with the scenery to open up a new movement option, aside from using the key at the front door of the manor, which is a rather natural and intuitive action to take. Well, there is some rubble in front of the zombie lord's crypt that you also need to clear with a shovel, but most players wouldn't discover this on their first few attempts, since they had to ignore the game's death warning and actually die to find out about it. I wasn't even aware that there was something behind the rubble. To me it just looked like another dead end, just contextualized with this slowly deteriorating building. Even more so, to me it served as a warning for the death trap upstairs, where the dilapidated floor gives away as soon as you enter the room. Okay, I shouldn't go back either, so let's go to the right. But on the other hand, there had to be a basement, and the vampire lord had to be residing inside the mansion. I mean, where else would he hide? That's just horror story writing 101. And when you've opened all the doors and explored all the rooms inside the mansion, well, the only way forward has to be behind the rubble. By combining the car battery with the wire and the nitroglycerine, all of which you can find before entering the mansion, you create a bomb, so it stands to reason that you have to use it here to clear the path. There's nothing else where it would make sense to use it on, and I don't think the game would want you to just blow up a random building in town. Well, let's talk about the moon logic. The term describes maybe the biggest trapping of older adventure games, where some puzzle solutions are just so outrageously ludicrous that no player is able to work it out without a guide or painful and tedious trial and error. It's not easy to create a whole game's worth of puzzles that are at the same time challenging but still fair for all players, so there will be times where some players just can't solve certain puzzles. They might not notice the breadcrumbs the developer left behind, they might not understand the developer's mindset, or maybe the puzzle really is just bonkers. This game has its share of both kind. To clear the rubble, you have to use the shovel. This doesn't sound too far off, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. To me, broken wooden beams and chunks of concrete don't sound like a job for a flimsy shovel. But yeah, thinking about it made me realize that there's really no other item in the game that would be better suited for the job. Aside from the bomb, but you need that to blow up the cinema and uncover the lair of the Lord of Mummies. Now you can find a scroll telling you that the bandage chief resides below the cinema, and I guess after trying and failing for a while to find a hidden path to the cinema's basement and knowing about the bomb you can create, it's possible that you might come to the conclusion that you have to blow up the whole place. But that's not all. You have to plant the bomb inside the cinema, go back to the telegraph station and destroy the telegraph machine and use the broken off piece as a remote detonator for the bomb. How on earth would you come to that conclusion? I'm not saying that it's impossible to solve, but it's so complicated and unconventional that there needs to be hints for this solution. Like, when you click around in the cinema, it can say something like, "If there's something below the floor, I need something powerful to break through." And when you plant the bomb inside the cinema or try to use it, it could tell you that it's too dangerous to simply detonate it and you need some kind of transmitter to detonate it remotely. Well, yeah. Most of the game's roadblocks are inside the mansion. While you can solve a lot of puzzles in the town out of order and discover a lot of the items you need to beat the 4 bosses at any point during your playthrough, there are certain sequences you have to adhere to inside the mansion. You can only access the upper floor and the basement after finding the required keys, and you need to read a specific book in the upstairs library to be able to dig up a grave at the cemetery to find a weed that can be used as a werewolf deterrent and is required to kill the Lord of Werewolves. You also need to visit the basement and kill the Count over here to find the clue that allows you to blow up the cinema. Then you have to find the combination to a safe to acquire an ankh you need to weaken the Lord of Mummies, so that you are able to kill him. And oh man, they fucked up the whole hunt for the combination in the DOS version. So throughout the whole residence are hidden nodes, each with a different singular number of the combination. Now in the C64 version, this is rather straightforward. By searching through containers or examining certain background objects, you pick up these little nodes and store them in your character's inventory. On each node are two numbers. The first one indicates the position in the combination, and the second one is the actual part of the combination. Obtaining all of them lets you quite literally piece the combination together and open the safe. In the DOS version, there are no little nodes. You still find the numbers to the combination in the same spots, minus one or two cut puzzles, but you better write them down the instant you find any of them and better hope you don't accidentally click them away, because the game doesn't tell you again which numbers you already found. You can examine the spots once more, but the game only tells you that there's nothing else to be found. What a huge oversight, from handing you the actual clues as an item to not letting you review your findings at all. In a game where descriptions range from short single-line statements to multiple text box long explanations, where you have to rapidly click around when fighting monsters. It is so easy to unintentionally examine one of these clues and then accidentally close the message before managing to read it. And it's doubly worse nowadays because of the stupid save system that isn't usable on modern systems, at least not without some tech wizardry. You mostly don't really need to save in this game, it's just stuff like this that can royally screw you over. And even when you manage to find and remember or write down all the clues, it's of no use to you because the DOS version only tells you the different numbers contained in the combination, not their position. So with a 5-digit combination, there are 126 possible combinations, if my math is correct. And each wrong attempt inflicts a bit of damage on the character you're controlling at the time. While not impossible, it's a huge pain in the ass. There was no reason to change this from the C64 version. The only thing I can think of would be a lack of disk space, so they had to add some objects and a handful of symbols in the dialog boxes. But then again, all this was in the C64 version and the DOS version released on CD-ROM, which also no one uses anymore these days. Oh man, I'm getting old. And I'm not getting any younger making this critique, so let's wrap it up. The last thing I want to go over is the titular Lords of Doom themselves. They are hidden all over town and you need to kill all of them to beat the game. Each of them needs to be weakened with a special item and then attacked with a specific weapon. 2 of them even require the use of a specific character to take them down. While there is no set order in which you have to defeat each of the bosses, it's not completely open-ended. There are certain requirements to making some of the bosses available or vulnerable. The easiest boss to discover is, as mentioned before, the Lord of Werewolves, who is just chilling at the edge of town. But you can't even attempt to attack him without exploring the mansion first. If you visit him before that, then you can kiss that character goodbye. The earliest boss you can defeat is in fact the Zombie Lord. It's not recommended to do so because discovering him requires you sacrificing another character and you don't want to lower your fighting strength too early on in the game, but you could if you choose so. To defeat the walking corpse you need to hack his body into pieces with the axe and then cover his remains with consecrated earth. After he is dealt with, you won't encounter any more zombies on the streets or inside the mansion. And that is true for all the lords and their minions. So the game actually gets easier the more lords you have already defeated, which might be a bit anticlimactic, but it gives you this nice feeling of accomplishment. All the other lords are guarded by a horde of their minions, so you have to fight a whole bunch of them just before the fight. And I guess that's implied with the zombie lord. And don't think about refreshing your resources between the minions and the boss man, because the little guys just respawn when you get back. So just prepare beforehand and hope you didn't waste anything needed for the boss. The mummy is the only boss where you have to defeat another lord first before you are even allowed to approach him. Because you need to kill the vampire lord to read up about the hidden basement in the cinema. And only after that are you allowed to blow it up. And then you just have to stun him with the ankh and burn him to a crisp with the flamethrower. Defeating him also causes all the item graphics to glitch out. Don't know what that's about. Now the vampire and the werewolf throw a wrench because they're only vulnerable to one of the characters. With the Lord of Vampires it's reasonable enough, because only Leslie Nielsen here with his experience as a cop as well as a vampire hunter lets him resist the Count's evil mind stuff for long enough to throw a bottle of holy water at him and then ram a wooden stake through his heart. Every other character misses with the holy water and wastes it and is then unable to move. The requirement for the Wolfman is complete bullshit. Only Charlie is able to fight the beast, but there is no good reason for that. At least Van Halen was described to us as a vampire hunter, but what makes Charlie so special that he's the only one able to stuff some anti-werewolf weed into the monster's gob and then pump it full of lead, or silver in that case? Now, if he were described as this incredibly buff guy, or if he were the local hunter, or something, anything, or they could have just dropped the character requirement altogether. Maybe just give some of the characters a bonus against certain monsters. Because that is something where the game could have done a bit more. As it is now, there's no real reason why there are multiple playable characters, aside from the useless character requirement for 2 of the bosses. When I recently played the game on stream, I came across this gem of a description. The pain is fucking And I wondered if this was because of the character I controlled at the time, so that the different characters described their findings differently. That's not the case, but it would have been awesome. Maybe different characters could have had different strengths and weaknesses, let only one character combine certain items, or maybe craft healing items. Have one character be stronger, maybe one with greater item carrying capacity. I'm fully aware that I'm creating a wholly new game right now. And I don't expect all this variety in a 30 years old game, but just a tiny bit more reason to have 4 different characters. The game could have done a bit more. That aside, this was a really satisfying trip to the past. Despite its flaws, it's still a fun game with some unique approaches to horror and adventure game design. For how simple and archaic much of it is, the atmosphere is really strong. Most of the flavor texts are incredibly stupid, but a lot of its mechanics really emphasize the whole survival horror feeling, even though this term wouldn't come to be for a few more years. But keeping your characters alive even outside of battles with food and drink, managing your inventory and planning ahead to keep running back and forth, and by that getting ambushed by monsters, to a minimum. All the little scare effects, it really immerses you in this horror setting. And the whole item combination we know and love from adventure games is so much more grounded in this game. I mean, it is ridiculous that we just built a bomb or a flamethrower out of a handful of general goods, but the way it's presented is, in a way, more relatable. Other adventure games use this mechanic often for more comedic effect, or to use mundane objects to create something really silly. Here, we're scavenging for tools and supplies. We are at a disadvantage against the monsters lurking in this town, but we use our ingenuity to compensate for that. And the game tests the player's ingenuity. How careful they are with limited resources or the use of the few defensive objects like the crucifix or the ankh. By experimenting with the different items, you even discover that you can produce an endless supply of ammunition for all your ranged weapons. From how the game plays and how it's structured, I think it still holds up, though the DOS version botched some of the on-screen text and some of the puzzles hard. So even with my limited hands-on experience I have with it, I'd say the C64 version is superior in pretty much every way, minus the fact that it's even harder to get and to get started. A remake of that one would be nice, and maybe 1 or 2 other games in this style. And with that, I will take my leave. This has been going on for long enough. I mean, I talked longer about the game than it takes to play through it. But that's how it is with retrospectives, analysis, or in-depth reviews. Sometimes you just want to take it all apart to see how it works. And this was a game that occupied my thoughts a lot when I was a kid. And now that I've finally beaten it and examined it from top to bottom, I can finally move on. Have a good one. This has been Rady, and I hope to see all you gorgeous gamerinos and gamerinas again on the next game.